The U.S. military intercepting 2 Iranian oil supertankers that were attempting to evade its blockade. U.S. Central Command saying the tankers are now anchored at an Iranian port in the Gulf of Oman. CENTCOM saying the...
Well, Brian, just hours after President Trump extended the ceasefire to Iran indefinitely, it appears that Iran is already breaking it, opening fire on at least 3 vessels in the Strait of Hormuz and commandeering 2 of them.
Iran did not lose control of the strait because of missiles. It lost control because 3 oil tankers stopped answering Tehran. At 2:17 in the morning, somewhere east of the Strait of Hormuz, 3 dark-hulled tankers changed course by less than 6 degrees. On a map, it looked like nothing. A tiny bend in open water. A navigation correction. A captain avoiding traffic. But inside Iran's maritime command room in Bandar Abbas, that 6-degree turn detonated like a bomb. Because the tankers were not just carrying oil. They were carrying leverage. And the people who intercepted them were not supposed to be there. For 6 hours, Tehran stayed silent. Washington stayed even quieter. And somewhere between the Omani coast and Iran's missile batteries, a Delta Force team pulled off the kind of operation governments deny until the maps start changing. But the real question is not how they stopped the tankers. The real question is who tipped them off. Watch the route. The tankers had left under ordinary cover, commercial identifiers, civilian crews, routine paperwork, nothing loud enough to trigger a headline. One was flagged through a friendly registry. One was listed as carrying crude for a private buyer. The third had changed its ownership trail twice in 11 months. To most observers, they were just another part of the Gulf's daily bloodstream. Oil goes out, dollars come in, pressure stays alive. That is the rhythm of Hormuz. Roughly 20% of the world's oil trade passes through that narrow artery. At its tightest point, the strait is barely 21 miles wide. On one side, Iranian radar. On the other, Oman. Above it, American satellites. Beneath it, listening systems nobody confirms. And in between, panic disguised as shipping. Tehran understood one brutal fact: missiles bring attention, but oil creates patience. If Iran could move enough shadow cargo through the Gulf while negotiations collapsed, it could buy time. Time for air defenses to reposition. Time for proxies to reload. Time for Washington to argue with itself. But then the tankers turned. 6 degrees. That was all. At first, Iranian controllers assumed a communications failure. Then they checked AIS transponders. 2 were still broadcasting. 1 had gone dark for exactly 14 minutes before reappearing with a new heading. 14 minutes. That number matters. Because 14 minutes is almost exactly the window needed for a helicopter-borne assault team to board, secure the bridge, isolate communications, and force a controlled course correction without setting off a general distress call. Not piracy. Not an accident. A seizure. But not the kind anyone could admit. Inside the Gulf, every country plays 2 games. The public game is diplomacy. Warnings, statements, phone calls, urgent meetings. The private game is movement. Aircraft repositioned at Al-Udeid. Destroyers drifting closer to the shipping lanes. Surveillance drones drawing invisible circles over the water. And for weeks, something had been moving beneath the surface. A pattern. Small cargo vessels were appearing near the tanker lanes, then disappearing into Iranian-controlled waters. Insurance records were shifting. Satellite images showed unusual nighttime activity near terminals connected to older smuggling networks. Then one more thing appeared. A tanker that should have been empty was riding low in the water. Too low. That was the first crack. American analysts at 5th Fleet headquarters in Bahrain noticed the displacement mismatch. A ship listed as carrying ballast was sitting like it had taken on a full load. Not enough to prove anything. Enough to ask questions. Then came the second crack. The tanker's escort pattern. Iran did not send a warship. That would have been too obvious. Instead, it used civilian clutter, fishing boats, utility vessels, short-range patrol craft that never came close enough to look military, but stayed close enough to interfere if someone tried to board. A floating screen. A moving denial zone. And this is where the story gets dangerous. Because the United States could have sent a destroyer. It could have broadcast a warning. It could have called it sanctions enforcement and made the whole thing public. It did none of that. Silence. Instead, the move came from somewhere quieter. A small team. Fast boats, night optics, electronic masking, a mission built not for combat, but for control. Delta Force does not normally appear in oil enforcement stories. That is the point. When Delta shows up in a maritime scenario, it usually means one of 2 things: a hostage risk or intelligence so sensitive that normal forces cannot touch it. So what was on those tankers? Crude alone would not justify the risk. Not like this. A tanker is a moving political grenade. Board it in the wrong place, and you do not just seize cargo. You challenge sovereignty, sanctions networks, maritime law, and the pride of a regime that builds its survival around never looking cornered. That is why Tehran panicked. Not because oil was stopped. because something else was exposed. At 3:42, the first tanker reduced speed. At 3:49, the second followed. At 4:03, the third shut down non-essential communications and drifted for 8 minutes before restarting on a new heading toward international inspection waters. No public distress call. No missile launch. No Iranian Navy interception. That silence tells you more than any headline. If Tehran believed this was a simple boarding, it would have screamed. It would have released video, names, radar tracks, threats. It would have flooded state media with proof of American aggression. Instead, it waited. Because Tehran did not know how much Washington had found. And Washington did not want Tehran to know how it found it. Remember the 14-minute blackout. That was not random. For years, Iran's shadow oil system has depended on confusion. Tankers change names. Cargo transfers happen at sea. Paperwork moves through cutouts. Ships go dark, reappear, blend into traffic, and sell oil through layers of distance until the origin becomes a fog. But fog has patterns. And patterns can be hunted. By 2026, the battlefield was no longer just ships and missiles. It was data. Engine signatures, hull depth, payment trails, port timing, crew rotations, satellite heat maps. One tanker turning off its transponder might be normal. 3 ships linked through the same financial ghost network? That becomes a target. And that is where the hidden player enters. Not the US Navy. Not the CIA. Not even Delta. The hidden player was the shipping database. A quiet commercial intelligence network that tracks ownership changes, maritime insurance, hull histories, and suspicious routing. Somewhere inside that ocean of paperwork, someone found the link Tehran thought was buried. A buyer. A broker. A state-connected middleman operating through clean front companies. And once that link was confirmed, the tankers stopped being oil ships. They became evidence. Now the mission changed. Do not sink them. Do not strike them. Do not create martyrs. Take the ships intact. That is harder than firing missiles. A missile is simple. Boarding is intimate. You need to control the bridge without panic. Separate the captain from communications. Secure the engine room. Prevent scuttling. Stop the crew from sending one coded phrase that could trigger Iranian patrol boats to converge. And you need to do it while every radar station on the Iranian coast is looking in your direction. One mistake, and Hormuz becomes a shooting gallery. At approximately 4:10, the first US team moved. Not from a carrier deck in a Hollywood-style launch. From a lower-profile platform farther out, masked by civilian traffic and supported by airborne surveillance that never crossed the threshold into open provocation. The approach was timed between radar sweeps and radio chatter from routine commercial movement. 2 boats, then 3. Low profile, no lights. The first target was not the captain. It was the communications room. Because in maritime seizures, the first battle is not fought with rifles. It is fought with seconds. If the crew gets one warning out, Iranian command can claim an attack. If Iranian command claims an attack, patrol craft move. If patrol craft move, US assets respond. And once both sides start responding, nobody is in control anymore. That is how wars begin. Not with decisions, with reactions. By the time Iranian controllers realized the lead tanker had drifted off its planned track, the bridge was already under control. The crew had been separated. The engine room was secured. The ship's external messaging had been restricted to routine navigation signals. No panic. No broadcast. Just movement. And then the second tanker turned. This is the moment Tehran understood the scale. 1 ship could be a malfunction. 2 ships are a pattern. 3 ships are a message. Inside Iran's command chain, the argument would have been brutal. Send fast boats and risk a direct clash? Fire warning shots and admit the tankers mattered? Call Moscow? Call Beijing? Release a statement and expose the route? Every option burns something. So Tehran chose the one thing it hates most. It waited. For almost 6 hours, Iranian state media said nothing. That silence was not weakness. It was calculation under pressure. Because if the seized cargo was officially denied, Iran could not easily retaliate without admitting ownership. But if Iran admitted ownership, it confirmed the sanctions-busting network. And if it confirmed the network, Washington could freeze more assets, expose more brokers, pressure more ports, and turn a secret oil operation into a global financial hunt. That was the trap. The tankers were bait, but not American bait. Iran had built the route to bypass pressure. Washington turned the route into a confession. Now look at the geography. The Strait of Hormuz is not just narrow. It is psychologically narrow. Every naval commander knows that one collision, one missile lock, one misread drone track can ignite the entire Gulf. Iran's coastal missile batteries can threaten ships. US aircraft can erase those batteries. Everyone knows both facts, so everyone pretends not to test them. But this operation tested something else. Control. Not control of the water. Control of escalation. Washington did not bomb a facility. It did not hit a base. It did not kill a commander. It took an asset Tehran could not publicly defend and moved it out of reach. That is why Delta mattered. This was not about firepower. It was about deniability with teeth. By sunrise, satellite watchers noticed 3 tankers sitting outside their expected corridor. Maritime chatter increased. Insurance monitors flagged route irregularities. Regional diplomats started asking questions privately before anyone asked them publicly. And still, no one confirmed the obvious. Then came the detail that rattled Tehran. The inspection teams had not just found crude. They found compartmentalized cargo documentation, encrypted storage devices, and shipping instructions tied to multiple end buyers. Not weapons. Not nuclear material. Something more embarrassing in that moment. Proof. Proof of who was buying. Proof of who was helping. Proof of how the network stayed alive. Names. Accounts. Ports. One official in the region reportedly described it with 5 words: they captured the oil map. That was the delayed reveal. The tankers were never the main prize. The map was. Because once you have the map, you do not just stop one shipment, you threaten the entire chain. Every future tanker becomes suspicious. Every broker becomes exposed. Every port operator starts wondering whether their name is already in an American file. That is how economic warfare turns kinetic without firing a shot. And Tehran knew it. So the panic did not come from losing 3 ships. It came from the possibility that 3 ships had unlocked 30 more. At 9:30, Iranian naval patrols increased movement near Bandar Abbas. At 10:15, U.S. surveillance aircraft shifted patterns. By 11 o'clock, regional oil traders were already pricing in risk, not because of a confirmed battle, but because of uncertainty. Markets hate missiles. They fear uncertainty more. One rumor in Hormuz can move millions of barrels. One seized route can spook insurers. One unexplained tanker diversion can make shipping companies demand higher premiums before breakfast. That is the strategic effect. No explosion, still damage. But the most dangerous hour came later. Around midday, an Iranian patrol group moved toward the outer edge of the transit corridor. Not close enough to attack. Close enough to be seen. A signal. A challenge. A message to Washington: we know what happened, and we are deciding what to do. American forces did not rush forward. They widened the net. A destroyer remained distant. Air cover stayed unannounced. Electronic surveillance intensified. The goal was clear: do not give Iran a dramatic target. Do not let Tehran turn a humiliation into a heroic confrontation. Because that is what Tehran needed. A picture. 1 U.S. ship. 1 Iranian boat. 1 tense radio exchange. 1 frame that could be sold as resistance. Washington denied them the frame. That may have been the smartest move of the entire mission. Sometimes power is not what you show. It is what you refuse to give your enemy. By hour 18, the tankers were effectively out of the Iranian pressure zone. Not publicly paraded. Not turned into a victory lap. Quietly controlled. Quietly inspected. Quietly transformed from vessels into leverage. And then the diplomatic calls began. Oman, Qatar, Bahrain, European intermediaries. Every capital understood the same thing: if Iran retaliated openly, oil prices could spike. If Washington exposed the full network, several governments and private firms could be dragged into the fire. If both sides escalated at once, Hormuz could go from pressure point to battlefield in a single night. That is the part viewers miss when they only look for explosions. The real battle was not on the deck. It was in the phone calls after. Tehran's problem was simple and brutal. It needed to respond loudly enough to look strong, but quietly enough to avoid confirming the tankers were theirs. Washington's problem was just as dangerous. It needed to exploit the intelligence without exposing the source. Because someone had tipped them off. A port official. A broker. A rival faction. A foreign intelligence partner. Maybe even someone inside the network who knew the route was becoming too dangerous. That question remains open. And it matters more than the seizure itself. Because if Washington got lucky, Tehran can rebuild. But if Washington has a source inside the shipping chain, every tanker becomes a liability. Every captain becomes suspect. Every broker starts checking his phone twice before answering. Paranoia spreads faster than sanctions. By the next day, Iranian messaging shifted. No direct admission. No clean denial. Just warnings about American interference, regional security, and the consequences of illegal maritime behavior. Translation: they were angry. And trapped. Because the more specific they became, the more they risked confirming the operation. The less specific they became, the weaker they looked to their own hardliners. This is the chessboard. Not missiles. Choices. And every choice costs something. For Washington, the operation created a temporary advantage, but not a clean victory. Iran still has missiles, still has drones, still has proxies across the region, still has the ability to pressure shipping without claiming responsibility. A damaged tanker here, a drone scare there, A cyber attack on port systems. A militia strike somewhere far from Hormuz. Iran rarely answers in the same place it was hit. That is why the next 72 hours matter. If Tehran responds at sea, the strait heats up. If it responds through proxies, the map widens. If it responds through cyber operations, ports from Fujairah to Rotterdam start checking their systems. And if it does nothing, the regime looks like it absorbed a direct humiliation in the world's most important oil corridor. None of those options are comfortable. That is the genius and danger of the operation. It did not corner Iran militarily. It cornered Iran narratively. And regimes built on resistance fear one thing more than defeat. They fear looking managed. By the climax of this story, the full picture is colder than the headline. Delta Force did not intercept Iranian oil tankers to stop 3 cargoes. They intercepted them to prove the route was compromised. The oil was the visible prize. The documents were the strategic prize. The silence was the confirmation. And Tehran's panic came from realizing that Washington had not just touched the shipment. It had touched the system. A system made of brokers, ports, flags, insurance tricks, ship-to-ship transfers, false buyers, and political protection. A system that works only as long as everyone believes the shadows are still dark enough. But after Hormuz, the shadows were not dark. They were mapped. That is why there was no dramatic announcement from Washington. No podium victory. No cinematic release of night vision footage. Because the best intelligence operation is not the one that makes headlines. It is the one that makes your enemy wonder what else you know. Somewhere in Tehran, someone is asking that question right now. Which tanker is next? Which broker talked? Which port is already compromised? And who inside the network sold the route? That is the loop that remains open. Because if this was only a seizure, the story ends with 3 ships. But if this was a penetration of Iran's shadow oil network, then the next move will not happen in Hormuz. It will happen in a bank account, a port office, a shipping registry, or a quiet midnight transfer where one captain suddenly realizes the ocean around him is no longer empty. And by then, it may already be too late.